Happy New Year and welcome back to the Baby Sleep Connection. I am excited about this episode because it's been on my mind all through Christmas holidays as I was doing some baking and making some neat little parallels or metaphors on how shortbread cookies are like parenting. I am looking forward to you having listened to this episode. I hope you enjoy it. And if you haven't done it lately, enjoy yourself a nice little cookie, your favorite kind, shortbread or other. Enjoy. Welcome to the Baby Sleep Connection, a podcast that explores baby sleep and more through the lens of attachment and development. I'm your host, Heather Boyd. I'm a mom of 3, an occupational therapist, and a certified infant and family sleep specialist. If you are a tired parent who wants to support your baby sleep holistically, keep listening as we delve into approaches that go well beyond the usual strategies of wake windows and bedtime routines. Your baby's sleep is connected with so much more. Hello and welcome back to the Baby Sleep Connection. This is season 2 and I'm excited to start this new year with this episode and to get rolling again after a bit of a hiatus. When I started this podcast, I didn't understand what seasons even meant for podcasts, but having taken a month plus off from the podcast over December while we were prepping for holidays and we were dealing with cold after cold after cold, and I was looking for a bit of a reset button, I now understand. Different seasons on podcasts is a nice little rest and reprieve to gather my thoughts and get excited about the next coming episodes. I will say we do have some exciting episodes coming up with guests that I have already recorded. They are in the roster for editing and publishing. I can't wait to share those with you, but I'm spreading them out. We're going to spread out the gift giving with these interviews over the next 3 to 5 months and continuing to interview new guests as well. So a lot of exciting stuff is coming down the pipes. The idea for this podcast came up when I was taking that nice reprieve over the holidays and was finding time to do something that I like to find time for, but I'm not very innately skilled at, and that is baking. And I was making, for the first time ever, shortbread. Now, I've dabbled in baking. It's not my forte. I get a little stressed out about all the components and like what I need to do and what this all looks like. If I've ever told the lemon meringue pie story on this podcast or to you in another way, you'll know this is not something that comes easily to me, but it's still something that I wish I were better at. At any rate, I made shortbread over the Christmas holidays and it turned out great, well enough and it was easy enough that I actually made a second batch of them for an event that we went to over Christmas. And it got me thinking about how parenting is like a shortbread cookie. I am a fan of Forrest Gump, and of course his mother at one point gives Forrest Gump some very sage advice that life is like a box of chocolates. You just don't know what you're going to get. Now, if you're a fan of X-Files as well, that is a show that took a little bit more of a cynical approach to life is like a box of chocolates. If you want the cynical version of that little saying, then look for it on YouTube somewhere. It is hilariously cynical about how life is like a box of chocolates. For today's episode, I am looking at how parenting is like a shortbread cookie instead of the chocolates, as much as I love chocolate. So I wanted to break down why this even came to mind, in part because of my struggles in the kitchen and how hard I work to make it go smoothly, how stressed out that I can get, and how practice makes progress for me. We're going to apply all this to parenting and to sleep parenting in particular. In this recipe that I opened up for the first time, I found it on All Recipes, I think, or some other website online. And there was step 1 of this recipe. And step 1, you may recognize if you do any recipe sleuthing at all, and that is gather all the ingredients. That was step 1. And I don't often see that in a recipe, but it was very valuable for me to have that as literally in black and white on the screen, gather all ingredients. I am someone that tends not to do that in the kitchen. I think somehow that I can go in and just start like putting it all together and expect it to work out. So gathering all ingredients is what I did. I thought I'm going to measure them all out and get them all, which allows me to know that I have everything I need, that I have hopefully kind of read through the recipe and know what to expect. Again, if you know my pie story, you will know how valuable that is. When that's applied to parenting, this is about gathering all the things that you need to be successful in whatever it is, whether it's a change that you're making to the sleep environment, a shift or transition to daycare and return to work, a shift in the schedule around when nap time is being offered, when bedtime is happening, how you're starting the bedtime routine. When you figure out what are the supports that I have, like who else is involved here? Is it grandma and grandpa, your partner or spouse? You're also needing at least a little bit of knowledge. This is one of the ingredients you need, is a little bit of knowledge around how sleep works so that you know kind of how to put it all together. And you also need to know your substitutions, right? If you're looking at the list of the things that you think you need, like a crib and your baby's own room, and you start thinking, well, gosh, if that's not working for us or it's not in alignment with us, it might be like getting gluten-free flour for your shortbread cookies. You've got to figure out what you can use instead. For some families, that means bed sharing, even though that may not have been their original plan, or bed sharing may be that quote-unquote substitution for the regular recipe since the beginning. You may also be looking at room sharing or figuring out floor mattresses or all of those other resources that are going to help you lay out a plan for making sleep as easy as possible. So with cookies, of course, you need the flour, the binder, the liquid, maybe some sweetener. For sleep parenting, you're going to need the knowledge, the support of who's backing you up or tag teaming with you, and the environmental pieces like the crib or the mattress. So I want to emphasize that not all of you need to think of sleep in terms of gathering all the ingredients. But if you feel like you're jumping in and winging it, slow down to gather the things you need first. Almost never is it a sleep emergency where you need to change something right away. Sometimes we do, either because of a mental health crisis, or you're at the brink of burnout, or there is some type of significant change that requires an immediate pivot in how you're doing things. For many of you, you've already got all the ingredients. You know how this works. You've got everything all measured out. You know enough about baby sleep. You're figuring out more and more about your baby in terms of their sensory needs and their temperament. And so you're at that point where you're a little bit more experienced in the kitchen and you can go with the flow a little bit. When you know the basics, you can use what you have. You know what's available to you. And you've also got what you need, so you're not scrambling. When you understand how sleep works, and I go back to this time and time again with the families that I'm working with, a little bit of knowledge about, with baking, it'd be how binders work, like how do eggs work in a recipe and do bananas work instead? What kind of flour are you using and how does that impact how long it needs to cook? That same kind of knowledge around sleep and how it works means that you can use less effort doing what works with what you have. You're not kind of fighting the chaos that comes with trying to cobble together things that aren't fitting together well. So going with the flow is great within the confines of knowing a little bit about sleep and knowing enough about your kiddo and having enough of the resources collected. But I know there are also some of you in and out of the kitchen, in and outside of parenting, who are the one-dish wonders. These are the parents who want to keep it as simple as possible. So think of those one-dish casseroles, or what I do with my oatmeal cookies, which I've been making for decades now, thanks to a recipe from a roommate when I was in university. I have a recipe for oatmeal cookies. I don't even need to look it up. I make it all in one bowl, even though the rules of cooking and baking are to put all the wet ingredients in one bowl, all the dry ingredients in the other, and then you mix it together. What do? You add wet to the dry, right? Well, sometimes you can just make it all in one dish and save on the dishes, save on time, keep it simple. This is where, when you can approach your baby's sleep as a simple one-dish casserole, you know that you can't know everything you need, but that you know enough. You know enough about how cookies are going to bake in the oven to be able to put it all into one dish and make it as simple as possible. With parenting, you know that it's about keeping it as simple as possible instead of trying to throw everything in the kitchen sink at it. Keep to the basics of what you know. Perfection doesn't exist. Perfection isn't the goal. You're going to keep it nice and streamlined, partly so that when something is working in your favor to make sleep easier, you actually know what it is that's working instead of having like 20 ingredients and 20 components of the bedtime routine. And I sometimes with parents call it the whole circus. Like you've thrown in the whole circus of everything to make this work. Ultimately, when you're taking that one dish casserole kind of approach, you're not making parenting any harder than it has to be. Simple can be wonderful. For most of the families I work with, overthinking is one of the challenges. And when you're keeping it as simple as possible, you help yourself away from the overthinking because you're just looking for the easiest route, the path of least resistance. You're not using everything that you have available to you. You're using the things that you absolutely need and the things that make the most sense. Now, to continue on this theme of how parenting is like a shortbread cookie, I want to speak to this idea of achieving or getting to a certain milestone with sleep, where maybe your baby is starting to link sleep cycles, or nap times are starting to be more consistent, or bedtime is going a little bit more smoothly. And the tendency for many of us, the overthinkers especially, but I think almost all the parents I work with, you're thinking ahead to the next milestone or the next coveted goal or the next plateau that you're going to reach and how to get it. You're always looking ahead. Planning ahead and looking ahead is part of being a parent. We always have to be a little bit ahead of the game to keep things running smoothly. However, we sometimes look ahead so vigilantly that we forget to savor what's right in front of us. So on that cookie slant, if you finished one batch of cookies and you take it out of the oven and you're already thinking about the next batch and how you're going to make it better and how these ones are undercooked or overcooked, maybe a little bit crispy around the edges, you're not getting to enjoy the present. Savor the cookies you've just taken out of the oven. In sleep parenting, savor the gains that you have made and the wins that you have, even if they're small, even if they're not locked in. And on that locked in note, so often with parents, they're worried that it's a fluke, that something happened. Well, just savor it. Savor what has happened in this moment. No matter what happens tomorrow or next week, we know that we can savor this batch of cookies now. And so as parents, once your baby is sleeping through the night, once they can fall asleep alone, you're thinking to the next piece. And I'm going to encourage you to just savor it. Savor that batch of cookies. I know I did with these shortbread. I didn't know, because it was a new recipe, whether I would ever make it again, whether it would be too difficult. And so I let myself just savor the moment that I'd actually pulled this off. I'd had some impression that shortbread cookies were super hard. They weren't. They were so easy. And I thought, why would I build up this worry around whether this batch was going to work out or not? Suspending that worry as well can be helpful when it comes to making any changes with sleep as well. The idea is to just give something a try, learn something from it, and then you can build from there. Which leads to my last point that I wanted to cover today, which is the idea of learning and adapting. In the kitchen, it, for me, is a huge learning curve. And once I master one recipe, I really need to practice it and pull it out over and over again. With the pie story that I keep alluding to, I have eventually gotten one pie crust recipe that I've gotten the hang of, and one apple pie recipe and one lemon meringue recipe that I at least make often enough over the course of a year that I'm less intimidated. I'm going to tell you, with the pie, I was coming with like zero knowledge at all. I didn't realize that I could bake the pie crust, 2 days ahead of time, and then it's ready. I was trying to do it all in one day as if it was a batch of cookies that I could just mix and put in and it's all done. I didn't realize you had to bake the crust first. Yes, that is naive, but think about knowledge being power. Once I understood how that worked, it became way easier. And the same with sleep parenting. It's why when families work with me through my packages or my group program, there are a set of resources to help parents go through on their own pace. What does sleep actually look like at particular stages of development? knowing how it works changes everything. So when it comes to learning and adapting, the failures like burnt cookies or a really rough night or bedtime was too late, or you tried bedtime too early, or you dropped a nap too early, too soon, the failures aren't a failure of you, they are part of the process. Now, one of the things that I see hold parents back a lot is fear. Fear that if they change something, that it's all going to fall apart. Or fear that if you do anything, it's going to make it worse. And when parents reach out to me, it's already feeling really bad. And the fear around making it worse by making small changes is often really, really big. When it comes to fear and baking, the baking analogy, what if I was so afraid of making these shortbread cookies because I was afraid of burning them that I was always undercooking them, like taking them out of the oven too soon. And because of that, I never really got sumptuous, delicious shortbread cookies. What if I got over that fear and thought, if I'm always undercooking them, what's the worst that's going to happen if I leave them in too long? The worst case scenario is I get one batch of burnt cookies, and then I know that the ideal cooking time is somewhere in between. And I think for parents that are really worried about making a change, like bumping bedtime later or adjusting naps or changing where your baby is sleeping or how they're sleeping, if you make a change, you get to learn from it and you get to find out where that middle ground is, where that sweet spot is for your baby in terms of timing and ritual and routine. When you have a fear of moving things around or making a change, then it's a missed opportunity. I think one of the biggest fears that parents have is that their baby will be overtired. I think a lot of social media is really putting a huge amount of fear in parents' minds around being overtired, to the degree that parents are trying to get more sleep from their kiddos in a 24-hour period than their kiddos actually need. And when we kind of address that fear and know that if your baby is overtired one day, or you minimize sleep to test out how much sleep do they actually need to thrive, like that optimal kind of sweet spot for sleep, we need to kind of move a little too far to find the middle sometimes. And if we're always, over worried about them being overtired, we're going to miss the opportunity to find that ease with the ideal or optimized sleep. So where does this put us now? Well, when I think about my experiences with baking over Christmas, I know that I gained a lot of confidence, and I also did have one burned batch of shortbread. I got a little cocky. I thought I had it down pat, and at one point my spouse said to me, like, is there still a batch of cookies in the oven? This is by batch 4 or 5. I'd made a big batch and was on a nice routine of getting them in the oven and then getting them out and getting the next batch in, and I'd left the last batch in. So yeah, I did have an overcooked batch, but you know what? Those are the ones we kept at home and ate. They weren't the best cookies, but they were good enough. And so I want to leave you with this idea that when you are struggling with finding the way to have optimal sleep, to make it as easy as possible, know that for most of us, this is about getting to good enough. We do not need to reach for perfect. In fact, the harder we try to reach to perfect, the further away we get, because we're clinging really hard to this idea that there is perfect. So my parting words to you would be to gather the things that you need to make this as easy as possible. To go with the flow once you have the pieces in place. You can be more curious when you have the pieces in place already. And that includes the knowledge and the resources that you need to set up the sleep space the way that you want or the way that you're curious about. We sometimes have to just test these out. But once you know the basics, you can go with the flow. And you can keep it as simple as possible to see what is working well for your baby and you. Emphasis on you too. This is often not about baby sleep at all. Babies are often sleeping the way that works best for them, and it's us that can be a little bit more flexible around understanding that we have sleep needs that we might be cheating ourselves on too. I talked about that in an episode back in December. And to just savor what is working well now? With every client, I always ask them for the wins. What is one thing inside or outside of sleep that went well this week? When we have the tendency to move towards something that is easier and then boom, we're on to the next goal or on to the next coveted stage of sleep development, we miss the opportunity to savor what is happening right now. And there is almost always a win somewhere. And that's why I like to suggest to parents that they look for a win in or outside of sleep, because this is all connected together. If sleep is going well, then it may have a ripple effect through the rest of the day. If you've had a rough night, there still may be a win with a developmental milestone that may be impacting sleep, but is still worthy of celebrating. So I will leave you with that. I'm glad to be back and recording. I look forward to the 2025 season and the guests and episodes that I have coming up. So until next time, I'm wishing you a wonderful night's sleep, and I'll see you next time. Bye for now. Thank you for joining me on this episode. I do hope that you found the information and perspectives in this podcast episode helpful to you as you navigate your baby's sleep development. Of course, this podcast provides general information, and it isn't tailored to your family's reality or the specific needs of your baby. If you're concerned about your baby's sleep or health, be sure to reach out to your healthcare provider. If you're feeling exhausted and overwhelmed and you need a place to feel nurtured and reassured, you can find me on Instagram at familysleep.ca. Until next episode, look for the connections that support you and your baby.